Hello and welcome to Catamount Community Connection, our public affairs program here at Catamount Radio. I'm your host, Brian Collamore. Each week for an hour, we speak with the community leaders from the business, professional, nonprofit, and political arenas. Our goal is to inform and make our listeners aware of things that are going on in Rutland County and throughout the state. As we record this on the 19th of May, we will begin what I hope will be our second to last week in the 2025 legislative session. And all of the money bills, so the big bill or the budget, the transportation and the capital bill, all of those have been approved already and sent on to the governor. And normally what happens when that is, and normally it's the budget is the last thing we do, and then we adjourn. This year, there are some outstanding issues still to be considered. Education reform is the main one, and that will not be totally completed by the end of the next 2 weeks. It will be something that will be looked at over the summer. There's also a housing bill that will need to be either passed or not before we leave. So anyway, those are some of the things that are happening up in Montpelier. Our program brought to you by the Rutland County Agricultural Society, which has brought you the Vermont State Fair at Rutland since 1846. And we're looking forward to the 179th Fair, August 12th through the 16th at the Vermont State Fairgrounds. I did put an amendment on a bill that so far has not come out of a Senate committee, but I think it will, which will exempt the fair from impact fees and not require them to do offset mitigation. So we'll see where that goes. And I understand also there's a potential, at least for 28, so that would be 3-year delay in implementation of that so-called 3-acre rule. But again, all of that's still up in the air as we record this. We'll let you know, hopefully next week, whether any of this has happened. We're joined today by the Rutland City Mayor, Mike Doenges, and normally we check in with him every month or 5 weeks or 6 weeks. And he was with us when we had Andrew Brown visiting from London, and but we haven't had a chance to sit down with the mayor, I guess, for at least that long. And we'll talk a little bit about some various things today. Anyway, welcome in, Michael. It's always good to see you.
Good to see you, too. Good morning.
TIF, the TIF district has got a lot of press here lately. Gordon Dricillo from the Rutland Herald took the parking piece and sort of that inconvenience aspect, and it is going to be inconvenient for people that normally are used to a certain way of doing things downtown. There's no way around that. If you're going to put something in that space that's that big, the street's going to have to be torn up for a while. So you probably know a little bit more about that timeline, but I'm still very, very supportive of the Belden family and what's going to be happening downtown for sure. Yeah,
like you said, Gordon took one aspect that the progress is going to be a little bit painful for some of this. And the TIF is so much bigger. The district is much bigger than just the hotel. But the first project, what they call the phased filing, that first phase filing is going to be the city infrastructure work around the hotel that's being built. And we're really excited that the Beldens are making the investment. When you look at, everything that we look at in Rutland when it comes to development tends to be hindered by one or two things: time, right? Or making the numbers work. To build a hotel and to have it operate, every little piece of the pie has to be perfect because it is expensive to build in Vermont. It's very expensive. Labor is higher, costs here. We don't
regulatory pieces too.
The regulatory pieces are massive. The permitting processes are longer. So at the city level, and in getting the TIF and the things that we've done with this development agreement, which we'll talk about, it removes a lot of those concerns and makes it feasible, not just more profitable, but actually feasible for this hotel to get built in downtown. And at the last Board of Aldermen meeting where we discussed this, Peter Fagan, who used to represent us in Montpelier as well, like yourself, he came in, and one of the things he said, and it's right at the end of Gordon's article from this, is, if this doesn't work, we'll be celebrating 100 years of the pit in downtown Rutland. So a lot of effort has gone in both from the public and the private side to see this come to light. And one of the things that works the best for this, and a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, when we started the discussions on the hotel, TIF was just a talking point. It wasn't the key component. And as we went along and we found to make those numbers work, to make the timeline work, as we found the necessity to do the infrastructure work, we realized that TIF was the answer to actually make this feasible for the developers. In Montpelier, they call that anywhere they call that a but-for letter, right? But for the TIF district, this hotel wouldn't get built. And it's on so many levels, that's true. And, sometimes in projects, you squeeze that but-for in but in our case, we have 100-year-old water pipes running down Whale Street. We have a wastewater system that's built out of marble block that runs underneath half of the buildings on Center Street. We have just these different components that need to get upgraded to service a modern hotel. Not to mention the fact that the street's going to get torn up, not to mention the fact that we need to bury the utilities. So there are so many things that the city needs to do to have the infrastructure functional for a hotel. That's why a TIF comes in really handy.
So let's just, if I can visualize, are both Center Street and Whale Streets going to be dug up, if you will, or is it just Whale Street? And how does that sort of connect with Merchants Row later on? I'm trying to get a picture of how much will people still be able to move up and down both of those streets?
In the long run, we're going to have to dig up both streets at one point or another. We don't have to do them at the same time. That's some of the details that we're working through now. This summer that you're looking at is actually the non-TIF project. It's just the site cleanup, and they are two different components for many reasons, right? The federal money for site cleanup can't be necessarily tied to the building of a new project, and the TIF district can't be tied to something that hasn't been approved. There's all these different things. So the cleanup is being funded by the Beldens, and whether they build a hotel or not, that site needs to get cleaned up. So that project starts this summer. That's where we'll lose a couple of parking spaces. We've got to move a little bit of power, some of those components. In the following construction season, so after the cleanup is done and some of the basic things are completed, in the following construction season is when we'll be doing our work on the city side. So essentially not this summer, but the following summer.
Okay.
Now, we were working with different organizations in Rutland. We're working with CEDAR, which is the Community and Economic Development of the Rutland region. So that's the combination of the Chamber and the ED, Economic Development Corporation. We're working with the Downtown Partnership. We're working with City Hall. We're working with the Beldens. And we've already started messaging a lot of this to the business owners and the residents of the area. The next step is to kind of get the message out to the public what the construction plan is going to look like. And we meet monthly to figure that out. So we're getting down to kind of brass tacks on what that's going to look like from a city standpoint. All of this is going to happen over this summer. All of this conversation, all of the different components are going to start to click into place. And then this fall, we'll go out for a bond vote so that we can pay for the work that needs to get done. We're also applying for some grants and these other things that, like Northern Borders and whatnot, that'll help us with things like streetscape or doing some additional plumbing work or getting things ready for sprinkler systems, stuff like that within buildings. And that conversation, the ability to get that done is so important that we have that with the public properly, and they understand that that bond is actually going to be paid for by the increment that is created by the hotel. So right now there's a pit. The pit in even the Herald building is worth, let's say $500,000 of property value. Mm-hmm. So we get taxes on that. Now the hotel, when it's done, let's say it's going to be worth $20 million, just for round numbers. The taxes that we would charge, the difference in taxes that we would charge between the $500,000 and the $20 million, that's the increment that's created. And there's two sides to it. There's the city side and there's the school side. We stabilize the city side. The school side won't be stabilized. But all of that increment will come to the city of Rutland for 20 years. And that money we can then borrow against. So it's like, think about us borrowing against guaranteed income over the next 20 years, guaranteed revenue, we call it, over the next 20 years for this hotel. That is what we use to pay for the pipes, to bury the utilities, to get the wastewater corrected, to fix the street. So those dollars won't come out of the taxpayer pocket. They won't come out of your pocket or mine. It won't raise our tax bill. What it will do is it'll allow that development to invest in those improvements in the downtown. And that's what TIF's all about. It's about making sure that we don't burden those in the city for a private, to help a private project.
So is the amount of the bond the determining factor about how long it is to pay it back? In other words, I know there's been some TIFs that were 10 years, but we have, as you say, 20. So it must be a larger bond kind of thing. And that makes me think Killington must be really, really a long one.
So the way the TIF works, and there's a lot of dates and numbers in it, right? When you file the first thing. So our TIF district officially started January 1, even though VEPC didn't approve it till May, right? Or April. The most important numbers to remember is that you have 10 years to develop projects and 20 years in total to pay them back.
Okay.
So the idea being that 10-year number, what that really is, if somebody comes in at year 11 and says, I want to build a hotel in your TIF, we can't collect on that. They're going to have to do it on their own, or we're going to have to pay for the infrastructure on our own. The TIF has essentially closed its project window, but we do have 20 years to pay the borrowing back. And that's actually the positive. That's the positive. It's 10 years to incur the debt, 20 years to pay it back. So.
And where are we borrowing from? Who's holding the note on the bond?
So these will be bonds. It's the bond bank. Usually we'll find us the right bond to do that. And that's, there's a couple different areas. One of the things we might have to do is a little short-term borrowing. So when the hotel starts getting built, there's no real tax increment, right? But we still have to start our projects. So we can go out, take the big bond out, but we still have to make the payments on that bond. And with not enough increment coming in to make the first payments on the bond, it's really years 3, 4, 5. What we'll do is we'll take out short-term loans. This is what Killington's doing right now. So what we'll do is we'll take out short-term loans and use that to just pay the bond payments. And then we have to privately pay the interest on the short-term loans. It's finance. We just have to move some money around to do it. But we've got a couple of different ways, again, to not burden the taxpayer with those payments. And those payments would be like $10,000 a year in maybe interest, depending by the 5th year, right? It'd be relatively small. And those are things that we all openly discuss. We've got a website that covers all this. If you go to the Rutland Redevelopment Authority webpage and you Google Rutland TIF, you'll find it. And it talks about all these different processes that we have to go through. And it is so carefully monitored. You hear horror stories about TIF districts that have failed.
We haven't had any in Vermont.
No. And that's lucky for us but most of the time it's because you don't do the math correctly on the front end. But we have tables and tables of what needs to get done. We are mapping everything out very conservatively. So, I was talking about that $500,000 to $20 million swing, but we're even calculating we're only going to be able to see that hotel valued at $15 million. Well, we know it's probably going to be worth more than that, but we only want to guarantee so much. In the end, we're going to actually end up collecting more increment than we even predicted, which means that can go into other projects within the district. So we talk about the TIF district, and we've been real focused on the hotel because it is the first project. But the TIF district covers down State Street, just past Linda Lee. It covers all the way up to the Beverage Center, or, at the intersections of 4 and 7, because that's kind of the corridor where most of the improvement that could happen in Rutland also meets most of the need for infrastructure. And when you look at those two components together, that's where you really want to situate your TIF district. We've had some pretty critical opponents of this who understand TIF up to this point. But once they saw the TIF district, they saw that we're managing the project, they saw we understand the finances, and they know the consultant we're working with, they've been really happy with what we've done. So we're excited that even the critics are satisfied. So
I know there have been a couple of people, the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, which has to do with taxes, and the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, which is the counterpart to the Finance Committee in the Senate, both don't like TIFs. And so it was a pretty good sales job to get them to go along. In the Government Operations Committee, on which I sit, we just moved a bill out last week that gives municipalities a choice of level payments or the graduated one. So in other words, when you go to buy a car, for instance, and you take out a loan from a financial institution, the payment that you make, it might be the same payment every month, but most of it early on is for interest payment and not principal.
That's right.
And so the municipalities will have a choice about whether to do it that way or whether to level off the payments. And it might take a little bit more because the interest will cost them more in the end. And I don't know which way the TIF is structured.
Well, our TIF will be likely the old style,
okay,
right? And actually that really benefits the TIF because the project doesn't really start earning until later on.
Yep.
So it's actually really nice to have interest-only payments on the front end because we're not bringing in the larger increment until later.
Yep.
It makes sense. They match really well together. We do have other projects in the city where we would want the level funding. We want predictable payments, and that's what this bill is really about. How can you say to a municipality, well, you only pay $100,000 a year for it this year, but by year 7, you're going to be paying $700,000 a year, or whatever it happens to be. So for us, being able to evenly predict, for us at the city, we know it's going to cost us $220,000 a year to make this payment. One, that allows us to set the tax rates correctly. It gives us some real predictability. So we're excited about that bill. We won't use it for everything, but it'll be nice to have that option. And that's a little different in the bond world, but essentially it accrues, and at the end of the day, your bond is still the payout of the bond.
And so if it's a 10-year situation, is the hotel going to be up before 10 years is up? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. We, based on the conversations we've been having, if you really look at it's probably an 18-month from the beginning of the time they start the construction to the time they open the doors. And that puts them, it's floating right now, and I don't necessarily want to speak for their timeline, but it puts our timeline, their timeline, the Paramount, kind of all finishing around the same time, so we don't have a big outdoor construction project while we're doing a big indoor construction project. And you've got to think about balancing all of those resources. Can we have the road torn up and bring a crane in on the same day? Absolutely not. But where our project starts is maybe when they're done with the outside and they start working on the inside. So. And
you mentioned early on that the Beldens are footing the bill for the cleanup of that site. And for those that weren't here, I was here in 1973 when the old Berwick bill burned. And I know that the soil was, I don't want to say infected, but there was a dry cleaning situation.
Oh, yeah.
And I got to think there was something with the Herald, too, but I'm not sure. I don't want to blame people that weren't involved, but I don't know whether there was anything on site that the Rutland Herald used to do that also affected the soil of that area. And that's what has to be cleaned up. And as I understand it, they have to dig it out and somehow truck it or transport it, maybe by train, I don't know. Somewhere out in the Midwest, I want to say it was Ohio, there was a Midwestern state that is the only area that accepts all this. Yeah. And then basically they put the good dirt back in and then put a cement cap on it, and that's where you could start building.
Yeah, so that's exactly the challenge. And it's the cost of the original cleanup of this site, I think it was 10 years ago, was $500,000.
Now it's $5 million.
Now it's $5 million. Yeah. And the majority of that cost is the transportation of the contaminated soil. And the majority of that contaminated soil, is from the dry cleaner that burned down along with the hotel back in the day. Now, we've been parking on that dirt for a long time. We've been doing different things. I remember when we had concerts in the pit and movies.
That's right.
There's been all sorts of different things there. But all of that contamination is encapsulated in those soils. So the minute they start digging it up, they're going to have to get it off site and get it out there. And it does, it's interesting, the environmental protections around these soils. They call it dirty dirt at the state just for simple. But they keep track of it. So they know they tag every truckload. And then when the truckload goes into the landfill, they know exactly where it is and what vault they put it in and how it's encapsulated. And they have to record all that data. There are new technologies coming out every day to treat that kind of contamination, but right now storing it is truly the safest way they know to deal with it, to keep it from getting into water systems and other things like that. So the hope is that the cleanup is swift, and there is some grants that the Beldens are getting, but they're basically borrowing money, and they're going to have to pay it back with hotel proceeds over the years just to get that site clean.
Yeah. I don't even know how far down they have to dig, but it's leached over the years into however many inches or feet it is. And you're right. I mean, we've been exposed to whatever it is for 50 years. And as far as I know, nobody's, been affected. I mean, maybe they have and we just don't know it.
As long as you're not eating the dirt, I think you're okay.
I guess. So that will be, for those of you just tuning in, we're talking to Rutland Mayor Mike Doenges. And The project this summer that you will see in what we affectionately call the pit will be the remediation of the contaminated soil, paid for by the Beldens, not paid for by the TIF, not paid for by you, the taxpayers. It's all going to be a Belden bill, if you will. And so they'll be digging that up and moving it to, and I don't know what state it was. I think it was Ohio. Could have been another of the
I think it's
Midwestern
Michigan. You're close.
Michigan,
You're close.
yeah. Okay.
It's one of those college football rivals.
And then at the end of this summer, that should be done, all things going as planned. And then the summer after this one is when you'll see some beginning of the construction of what will be a new hotel. And there'll be a restaurant and a bar on the top floor, and people can use it as a hotel. Just come in today, leave tomorrow, or stay a few days. And then there'll also be a certain number of apartments that people will live in. And so you may see some construction the summer after this in terms of the street sort of getting torn up. And as the mayor mentioned, we're probably not going to do both Center Street and Whale Street the same time. That would be, I don't know, in a way, if you could do it and you had enough construction people to do it, it would simplify it, but it would also mean a lot more interruption, I guess, right?
Yeah, it would. You know, it'd be hard for you look at what Brandon went through. You look at what Winooski is going through right now, and it's very disruptive when there's road constructions on the primary access to those businesses. Winooski's doing at least a one-way, so you can still get to stuff and you can cross the construction. And Brandon, we saw the additional traffic. I think it was all summer long. One summer it was an extra 20 minutes to get through Brandon. That's, such is life at some point. You got to kind of deal with it because we're not building from the ground up. We're taking existing hundreds of years old infrastructure and trying to bring it up to snuff to make this work. So we are working with the community, and we're going to let them know exactly what's going on, and we're going to be super communicative about the different components so that we can get it done as quickly as possible with little disruption as possible. We're going to, as Lyle Jepson from Cedar, who you've had on before, loves to say, we're going to celebrate the dirt. And I think that's a great way to do it because at the end of the day, these projects are going to benefit everybody in downtown and everybody in the city.
We're talking to Rutland Mayor Mike Doenges. We'll take our first break here on Catamount Community Connection, and we'll be right back. We are back on Catamount Community Connection, our weekly public affairs show. This week we're talking to Rutland Mayor Mike Doenges, and I'm Brian Collamore, by the way, your weekly host. The show brought to you by the Rutland County Agricultural Society, which has brought you the Vermont State Fair at Rutland since 1846. We're looking forward to the 179th Fair, and the dates are August 12th through the 16th this coming summer at the Vermont State Fairgrounds. So we've talked a lot about the TIF districts. Tax increment financing is what TIF stands for. There's another one up at Killington, which is much larger and much more substantial. They're going to build a village center up there, and that will also involve, bonding and some interesting projects. If you go on Route 4, the part right after you go through where the Killington Access Road comes in, and that's the only, well, not the only part of Route 4, but one of the few that actually goes north-south. The road is an east-west one, but that one goes north-south. So you're down on what people call the Killington Flats, and you look up, and there's a point at which you'll see an abutment and some digging going on. I believe Markowski is doing that work, but it could be Casella too. I don't know who's all involved. That is the beginning of that. And it's actually, and Lyle Jepson and I talked about this in a show a couple of weeks ago. You have to actually pump water up the hill in order to serve that village center. And that's what that's all about. And so it's a huge, huge endeavor to do. And it'll get pumped up to some holding tanks, which are, huge. And then from there, it'll go up another stage into the what will be a new village center. So that's also on the horizon. But we've been talking pretty much just about the Rutland TIF. And I don't know whether, has the Linda Lee fashions piece ever come up again, or is it kind of on hold?
So it's one of the potential projects for the TIF district. And what's really important is understanding that these projects, when they come in the phased filings, we have to do one at a time, and we have to bring the big projects to VEPC, Vermont Economic Progress Council. They're essentially the state's delegated authority to allow us to withhold those taxes for those projects. And so we are looking at, there's certainly developer interest in that site, which is phenomenal. We have an amenable owner on that site that is willing to do a deal at some point, and that site definitely has some cleanup that's necessary. So it is a good potential TIF project, with the reclamation of the site, the cleanup of the asbestos, and some of the. It's not a huge petroleum site, because most of what was done in the factory, we called it a linen factory, but it was a dress factory. So it was sewing machines and textiles, right? It's a little different than what you think of in like a factory in a movie where you're making equipment. So it was a relatively clean site. It's just what's been done damage-wise over the years needs to be cleaned up. The building needs to be torn down. You can't salvage it. That's what we found out. And whatever goes there needs to be developed. But that is on one of our primary project lists, because we do see the potential. But we're not as far along with that, say, as we are with the hotel.
Okay. Let's move along, if we can, to the Rutland City Charter, which actually had two dates on which people voted. One of them was back on the general election back in November, and then the other one was town meeting. And there are different provisions in each of those questions, and then they were kind of combined into one city charter. I think there's 4 elements, and we had it in the government operations committees. The House passed it first, and it came across to the Senate, and it was voted out 5-0-0 in the Senate Government Operations Committee. So now it goes back to the governor, because we didn't make any changes. So that's called concurrence. And so the House will technically get the bill back, but it won't have to go through any long delay, because we didn't change it at all. And we took what they put in it and passed it along. I don't see any reason. And again, this show will air on the 25th. We're recording it on the 19th. So I don't have any reason to believe the governor will veto the charter of Rutland City. And so I think it'll become law. I don't know if it's on passage or July 1st. I don't remember the date. Yeah. But anyway, I know there were 4 elements in that, and all of them seem to make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, the first one, the one that passed in November by the voters, was something pretty simple. So we have this Rutland Redevelopment Authority, and it really focuses on how do we redevelop the city, how do we generate new progress economically, and just from a stability standpoint and sustainability. That authority is made up of a board, and I, as mayor, appoint most of that board. There's 2 seats, one from the Board of Aldermen and the treasurer seat, that are automatic. So if you're the city treasurer, you're on the RA board. However, we've always been limited to Rutland City residents, and there are a lot of property owners, both in downtown and throughout the city, that care about this community, that pay taxes in this community, that don't have a seat on that board. So we asked the voters, hey, are you willing to open up one of those seats to a non-resident property owner? So somebody who still lives in the county, but is that owns property in, say, the downtown or anywhere else. And the answer was yes, overwhelmingly, actually. So that was the first part of this charter change, is to allow me to appoint somebody from outside of the city, but is still, involved in that process. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So that one, I know you gave the, because you were up in the committee and gave me the numbers. I think that was the one that was like 4,200 yeses and maybe 11 or 12.
I think it was 1191 no's, okay. Yeah, something like that. And I don't have my notepad in front of me, so we'll just be guessing.
Regardless, it was like a 4-1 aye to that, and so that's one of them. Then there's also some sort of financial pieces where by charter you had limits on what you could spend to get stuff done, essence. And now that is no longer going to be or you move the threshold up in some cases.
So the first one was penalties. Not in any particular order. So penalties. So the city is allowed to impose fines and sentence up to 1 year in prison. We usually don't use that one. I don't think we've done that in a long time. Not since I've been around. And those fines in that imprisonment term are also set in state charter. So what we've had to do over the years is we've had to constantly, as the state raises theirs, we'd have to go back and change our charter to raise. And it's a 6 to 8 month process sometimes even longer, between voting, bringing it to the Senate and the House, and getting it through the system. It also takes up valuable time of those legislative resources. So what we decided to do is just say, hey, we're going to point to the state statute. So now in our charter, it will say for penalties and fines, match the state. I'm shorthanding it, but just follow the state statute. So as you update yours, so does ours. So now I think we can fine up to $800 right now, but if you decide to raise that to $1,250, ours will follow yours. And it just makes more sense to do it that way.
And then there was some equipment provision as well, right? Right.
So our equipment replacement funds, we have 2. And they're set by the taxpayer, like kind of a not to exceed. Now we can always exceed in the budget, but it's just more of a way for us to understand what the citizens are willing to pay for as primary components. So 2 things that have become extremely expensive, especially since 2020, so since COVID, have become fire trucks and police vehicles. So before you could get almost a fully loaded fire truck for $750,000. If you need the ladder truck, maybe that's a little bit more. If you need a tanker truck, maybe it's a little bit less. Those are about $1.2 million now. So we're pushing doubling in cost. So we increased the fire equipment replacement fund input. So how much we'll collect from the taxpayer. And then we've also created a new equipment replacement fund for police department. So our police vehicles used to be $23,000 fully loaded, right? You can't buy a car for $23,000 now, right? It's impossible. And that was years ago. We also have in the charter a forced language that makes us replace police vehicles every 3 years. And the reason for that is to make sure that we're able to be responsive with them, that they're in good, physical condition, things like that. So we created a new fund and ask the taxpayers for a certain amount of money to fund the police vehicles. In the meantime, what that does is that leaves us one more equipment replacement fund that police used to be in that was shared between police, recreation, and DPW, because the recreation crew has their equipment and DPW has their equipment. So now rec and DPW will split the same amount, and police has been removed from that. So all of those changes, again, passed overwhelmingly. It was more than, it was 2/3 majority on that. So,
and those were all on town meeting day.
They're all on town meeting day. Yeah.
Okay.
And then we had one more, and the last one was our purchasing process. So, most municipalities have a purchasing process that's referenced in their charter or don't even have it in the charter. We have one. What it does is it sets it up and it says you have this board of finance, and that's the mayor's seat, the board of alderman president's seat, and the treasurer's seat, and they decide on awarding bids. They just run this committee essentially that says, makes motions and awards bids and grants our departments the ability to spend money. If it's over $3,000, well, $3,000, again, much like vehicles are more expensive, $3,000 doesn't get you a lot today. So we were putting everything out to bid that was under $3,000, even if it was something as fixing, lights in a building or putting some new carpet in where it got spilled on, like stuff that should be day-to-day operational things. And those $3,000 limits were really valuable 30 years ago when $3,000 was a lot more valuable than it is today. So what we asked to do there is we said, hey, we're going to remove the dollar amount from the charter, the physical number of 3,000. We're going to point to a purchasing policy that will be decided on the entire Board of Aldermen, so the elected representative officials, and they'll decide what that limit is. And if you look at other municipalities, that bid limit, what the minimum, essentially, if we are going to go out to bid, it needs to be, if it's more than X amount, you need to go out to bid. In cities like Newport, Vermont, which is a tenth of the size of Rutland, you're looking at bid limits of $50,000 or $25,000, or some municipalities. The state level is $100,000 for buildings and general services. So we'll be somewhere in there. I think we're going to start off at 25, but we still want to hear from our department heads if it's over 3,000. We just want an update, and to allow us a transition period and a time to be able to, get used to the new limits and make sure that we're keeping an eye on the spend. Because while the city does have a $26 million budget, we want to make sure that we're keeping an eye on those numbers throughout the year, and that Board of Finance is a great tool to do that. So allowing for a little bit more flexibility in how we go about purchasing items, but also allowing us to have a real visual into how the dollars are being spent.
And again, for those of you tuning in, we're talking to Rutland City Mayor Mike Doenges. We just talked about 4 of the changes that came about with a charter change on the city's side. One voted back in general election, and then the other on town meeting day. They've both been through the process of the General Assembly. It probably won't be signed by the time you hear this show. The governor has 5 to 6 days to kind of look at each bill, have his own legal people go over it and make sure there isn't something in there that we missed, and then either sign it, veto it, or allow it to become law without its signature. I don't think this will rise to a veto for sure. So by the time you hear this, he'll have it in his possession, but he probably won't have had a chance to sign it into law yet. So I just had a thought. So if the city wanted to buy 2 police cruisers, is that subject to a vote by the voters, or is it just absorbed into the budget? So
now that we have the fund, as long as we have the money, it kind of gets absorbed into the budget or that those replacement funds. And so then it will come to what they do is the police department will say, hey, we've got the money in our equipment replacement fund. They'll bring it to the Board of Finance and they'll say, either we need to put this out to bid or we want to purchase it from somebody on the sole source list. And you get onto the sole source list by having things like very specifically. So there's not a lot of companies out there that will sell you fully outfitted police cars and can do it in a radius of Rutland, Vermont. So we might sole source, but most of the time for vehicles, we go out to bid because it's such a big deal. It's very interesting how they all come in like within $1 or $2 of each other. It's a safe process though, and it keeps the city whole. Like we aren't going to overspend. So that'll come to the Board of Finance and we'll vote on that. When we have to do things like, I'll give you a perfect example where something goes to the voters. When we have to borrow money, it says in our charter, if we're going to borrow money for more than a year, so longer term borrowing, we must take that to the voters unless it's already been approved. So if we're going to borrow money against things that are already approved in the budget, we're good. So leasing vehicles, we're good because that's already in the budget, right? We don't need to go to the voters for that. But this year in March also, we put a bond vote on the ballot. We put it on for $3.83 million. And that is, again, taxpayers aren't going to pay for that out of their pockets when it comes to their property taxes, but it comes out of our 1%
local options tax,
right? And one of the items on there was a new chiller for the rink at Georgetti. The chiller we've been using is 50 years old. And the fact that it's still running is amazing and has been fantastic. We've really leverage that asset. But when we want to do something like that, where it's large, $1.8 million large, the chiller, that needs to go to the voters. It really does.
So I'm guessing that there are even fewer companies for the fire truck purchase or lease than there are.
That's right.
There aren't a lot of manufacturers that make fire trucks. Is it normally a Vermont company in terms of the police cruisers, or does that factor in, like if you have to buy it from Arizona or something and you got to transport it all the way back? I'm just kind of curious. And are those purchases or leases?
Yeah, it depends on the situation. Okay. Sometimes we'll have the cash to purchase. If the interest rates are high, we'll absolutely buy it outright. Sometimes when the interest rates are really low, even if we have the cash, it's nice to borrow because that gives us an opportunity cost to maybe do two things at a time, or it changes the opportunity cost. But I think the piece of the puzzle is that we always want to look at each situation independently. So when we go out to bid for that fire truck, we have these metrics you were starting to talk about. Does it come from Vermont? Well, we have these rubrics essentially that we use. And each time we put something out to bid, we may have a slightly different one depending on what it is. So when we did our IT support, one of the top ones is, can they get to City Hall within a 4-hour window? Like physically, because if they're driving from New York, it might not be beneficial to us.
Right.
So we'll do that. We'll try to shoot for as many Vermont or as many Rutland companies first within reason. And we'll score pricing as well. But if there's a Rutland company that's twice the price of, say, a New York company, but it's for $1, it's $1 versus 50 cents, maybe we'll go that direction. But if it's $10,000 versus $5,000, we might have to go with the New York company because we have to be very, very fiscally responsible with these taxpayer dollars.
And I might be getting caught up in this a little bit too much, but I'm starting to get really interested. I'm thinking that the Ford Motor Company or General Motors or whoever, they must run a batch of sort of police / emergency responder vehicles. And then I don't know whether they put all the lights on and the siren and the rest of that stuff, or whether that's done afterward by sort of an accessory company.
That's exactly right. So there's a couple different ways to do it. We could buy a police vehicle through the local Ford dealer, but it usually won't come outfitted. But then you have these other dealers, these authorized dealers that outfit the whole thing, that know exactly what our package is, like what kind of light package we have, what kind of siren package we have. They already have most of that kind of prescribed. And we can just go to them and say that we want package 21A with this, on this vehicle, and buy it through them. So Ford will, they'll pre-buy 30, 40, 50 Yukons. I think that's what we have is the Yukon SUVs. And they'll get them ready to go, and then they'll have kind of the standard set, then the advanced set, and then it gets to us and we decal it, and then it's ready to hit the road. It saves a ton of time. We don't have to have expertise on staff. We do have one guy who knows these things inside and out, but he doesn't have to be crawling in there and installing them himself. And and honestly, we don't have the budget for that, to pay a couple of guys to do full radio install. I know Green Mountain Power outfits all their own vehicles themselves, but they have a team of like 6 people that do that, right? So we don't have that staffing. So it's great to buy it through these other companies. And
interesting.
Have them ready to go.
And I didn't mean to get to that level of...
No, that's good. I think people are interested in this stuff. So.
Yeah, no, I do. Yeah, I agree. All right. We're talking to Rutland Mayor Mike Doenges, and this is the show that will air on the 25th. We're recording it on the 19th. So, again, you run the risk of, 5, 6, 7 days ahead of time not being able to take into account what might have happened in the ensuing week. But we're doing our best here, folks. We're doing our best. And we need to take our second break here on Catamount Community Connection. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Catamount Community Connection, our weekly public affairs program here at Catamount Radio, brought to you by the Rutland County Agricultural Society, which has brought you the Vermont State Fair at Rutland since 1846, and show number 179, the Vermont Fair, for 179 years. It is set to go on August 12th through the 16th, 2025. Again, I promise you I will have Robert Congdon in at some point to flesh it out a little bit, tell us maybe some new acts that might be coming to the fair, and we'll talk a little bit more about hopefully getting them some relief from what is known not affectionately as the 3-acre rule, but all of that down the road a little bit. Today we're talking to Rutland Mayor Mike Doenges, and we have talked about the TIF, the charter changes that will be happening in Rutland City as soon as the governor puts his pen to the paper. And I know there's also some opioid settlement intersection with some of the things that might be happening soon, right?
Right. So what Brian's talking about is, the state in a class action lawsuit, amongst many others, was able to receive, because of the opioid epidemic, some settlement funds, and the city itself received some as well. So over the next 27 years or so, I think we'll receive something to the tune of like $1.2 to $1.7 million, depending on how it all pans out. Right now, we have about $350,000 that we've collected thus far, and we haven't really used it for anything. It's been sitting there. There's a lot of areas that you need, like the settlement comes with, hey, you need to use these monies specifically in these ways, and if you don't, you need to report back to us. Some of those ways are things like prevention. So whether that's school-age prevention or reuse prevention, or some of them are determined, some of them are health-related, some of them are treatment. And our police department, but really our vision center. So Commander Prouty, who's in charge of the community resource team, came to us and said, hey, we used to have this giant van that we drove around to take care of health issues with, those that were affected by, homelessness or opioid utilization or whatever it happened to be, and get them health services, get them just reach out to them and get connected. So this week, or this past week, the Commander Prouty came and presented, hey, we need a new vehicle. So we're talking about police vehicles, but we need a new vehicle to go do this. Our old one died. We actually had to junk it. And we've been without for a while, and we haven't been able to do this vital service with these other teams in Rutland to go and do this community outreach. So that's a perfect use of these opioid settlement funds because it falls within the prescribed areas. It's a clear categoric spend that we can say we're using it for this purpose, and we can track it. And I think that's really important. So it'll allow our community outreach team to get out there and spend time. And you'll probably have Commander Prouty in who can talk more about what they do, but to get out there and reach out to people that need it the most. So there'll be a little office in there. It'll be kind of like a command center type vehicle, but with physical resources and the ability to move people around and get them into where they need to be. So it was a nice effort. The other piece of that is we've also got a room. There's this thing called situation tabling, and the idea of it is as different agencies in the area, whether it's homeless prevention agencies, health agencies, veteran agencies, whatever it happens to be, as they're dealing with individuals in the area and they see a need, they can bring together the situation table and have these different groups come and sit down. And it might look different each time, but the idea basically being they all come together, have a conversation about this individual or this family unit and say, what do we need to do to help them get to the next step, whether that's a health issue, whether that's a housing issue, whatever it happens to be. And if you listen to this and you think, this sounds familiar, this is very much what Project Vision was like at its beginning, is as we were interacting with people and we're seeing those needs, we're calling out to the community to see how they can help. So this is just kind of an extension and kind of a rebirth of that. And if you don't get the opportunity to go to a Project Vision meeting, I would absolutely encourage you to, if you haven't gone in the past. They're great. There's usually free food. And it's a very uplifting meeting once a month. I think it's the third Thursday at noon. I'll get that correct and put it up on my page on the website. But the idea basically being that these teams work together to try to help those in need in our community. So one of the areas where we really struggled is to be able to have a common place to meet that's on, it doesn't cost the city or the police department additional money. So we're working on a conference room upgrade at the PD, which will allow more people to be in this room, which will have more technology so we can meet with remote resources and allow both Situation Table, Project Vision, our what we call our RutStat meetings, which is kind of the data meetings, all those to happen in a place that's a little bit more comfortable and it has a little bit more space to it because we do fill that room up. So we've started the work on that, and that is where we'll use some of those opioid settlement funds as well because it's directly dealing with the opioid epidemic in Rutland. And I'll tell you, when we talk about it, we try to keep it separate from the crime conversation. But when you look at the reports that we get out of our data, 85% of our petty theft arrests or citations are directly related to a substance use issue. Directly related. 85%, Brian. That means that 15% of the crimes are either unidentified or not related to it. That's tiny compared to the amount that is used. So it's so critical. And when we look at policing in Rutland and we look at, and Brian talks about this all the time, when we look at the way we approach these problems, that we deal with the problem, not necessarily the symptom. And that's what we're targeting with the utilization of some of those funds.
I did note, not necessarily with a lot of satisfaction, that the hotel motel program has reopened. I think in Rutland Town, what used to be the Holiday Inn, are again, well, I say, I don't think they've taken anybody from the program, but the facility itself, the building, is back open after being closed by the state for various violations of, quite honestly, public safety, public health. I mean, it was not a good place to be. And I don't know whether if people are there again, Rutland Town had a deal with the folks that own that they would pay a certain amount of money each month to the town for the police response that became necessary. So I'm not sure where that is. I did speak with the chair of the Rutland Town Select Board, because Brattleboro was interested in doing a similar thing. They also are involved disproportionately with the homeless situation down there. And one of my colleagues in the Senate said, "How did you guys figure that out in Rutland?" And I said, "Well, it's a little complicated, but I explained that because the hotel went through a change in terms of use, they had to apply for an Act 250 permit. And in order to avoid that, right, they said, tell you what, if you pay a certain amount of, so we won't, make that an issue kind of thing." So, and I said, well, is that still in effect? And the chair said no, because they've been closed. That's but right. If it reopens and they take those people in, we'll be looking to resume those payments. So I don't know where that is.
So where it is right now, from my understanding, is they are open as a hotel, and you could certainly do self-pay. But the state is not allowing them to take vouchers because, in the simplest of terms, they didn't provide a safe and healthy environment prior. So where there are other hotels that are still doing that. You talk about the General Assistance Program. Right now, also in Montpelier, H91 is a bill it was worked through the House. It's being worked through the Senate. I don't know if it's hit you at all.
It hasn't hit the floor yet, but it will probably soon.
And that's a complete rebuild of the way we handle these different services. And there's some changes from its original inception, like any good bill that goes through the legislature. It doesn't quite come out the same as it did at the start. And, there's still some proportionality concerns, right? Where Rutland handles, I'd say, a huge chunk, maybe 25% of the state's homeless population. We're only getting 15% of the dollar value, and that's to be split with Bennington. And Bennington also handles a big portion too. So I think there's still some proportionality concerns on how the dollars flow that I'm worried about. But I've got a team working on that in Montpelier that are up there properly vocalizing what we need, hopefully. But we need to see those resources where they're at. And, we're working on another shelter. So we have in Rutland, there is a shelter. It's called the Mission. But we're working on a state-funded shelter. And we're working on ways to really help, because there are certain situations where when this hotel program ends as we know it now, which will be essentially this summer, restructuring that and having resources available is going to be really important.
Yeah. So we have about 5 minutes left to the show.
Sure.
I want to mention one other thing that just occurred to me. I just had written down downtown events, or area events, if you will, because it's technically not. Well, I guess it is downtown. So Main Street Park. We have seen for a long time, well, at least a few months, some construction going on with what was the bandstand there.
Yep.
And I know people look forward to Wednesday nights, and it used to be Saturdays too, right? Where we
Sundays.
have
Wednesdays and Sundays,
where we have performances in the park. Are we on target for resuming that this summer?
We are absolutely on target, and they're going to be back on the bandstand again, which is great. So what you've seen is kind of rebuilding the bandstand. You'll notice now it's ADA accessible. You can roll your wheelchair right up onto the bandstand. We took down some of the rails. It's going to be a lot easier to hear, too, these bands that are playing, which is nice because it won't be reflecting the sound back off of the concrete, and it looks phenomenal. So they did a fantastic job just supporting the new structure. We've got some new paths going in. They were out there last week working on that. Weather, it's all weather permitting to get it done. But as long as the weather cooperates and it's not pouring every day for the next few weeks, we should be ready to go for the first concerts very soon. And you can look that up right on the Rutland Rec website, rutlandrec.org.
Okay.
And they'll be there. But we still have to replace some of the pillars that hold up the roof, so we'll be replacing those over the summer as well. So by the time the summer is over, it'll all be done. But we should be able to use that park and have concerts back in that bandstand in all summer long, which is going to be great.
And, of course, we have Art in the Park there twice a year, too. And so it's been a little bit awkward the last couple times because people had to sort of not get inside the fence where guys were working, again, gals probably, on rebuilding it. But I'm sure they'll be glad, the Chaffee Arts will be glad that it's all done.
Yes, we're very excited, and they're excited too that it's going to be done. Art in the Park will be back to normal. It'll be a different layout, though. It's going to be very interesting because we've got this kind of new hill approach and these ramps, and I think it'll actually make for an exciting change to see how they lay it out.
And I know from talking to Cedar, we've got the Whoopie Pie Festival, which this year is going to be in September.
That's right.
And we're not necessarily going to try to set a new... We have the record, so somebody's got to beat us before we got to set a new one. I understand those Mainers are maybe thinking they can beat us, but we'll see. But I know the event is going to happen, and that has been a tremendous success, and I know people are looking forward to that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Dreammaker Bakers, they retired and closed their doors, and it was what a high note for them to go out on is to hit this world record, which is really cool. So we'll have to see if we can keep the record or what it's looking like. But it packs downtown. Like creative events like that have been fantastic for our city, for our region as a whole. So we got a couple other things coming up too. As this airs, we'll have just done our spring sip and shop. That would have been on Thursday. So I'm sure that'll be a fun event. People love to get out for that. You can go into these different businesses and they have usually different, wine or beer or bourbon that you can try, things like that at each location. So that's always a fun time. And then we have the Pride Festival coming up on June 21st, and that closes down Center Street and Merchants Road, just like our Friday Night Lives do. And it's a big event. Tons of people. Usually, I think last year they had over 7,000 people come to Rutland, which is great. And then Friday Night Lives are coming. Not all of the dates are solidified yet, but they try to do one July, one August, one September, I think are the targets for this year. One of the things we've heard is that we want more events like that. They don't have to be that big, just little different events. So we're always thinking about what else can we do in that nice downtown space that we have or in the parks to draw people in and give them some fun, entertaining things to do. We love it. I'm a huge live music fan. And, if you go out on the parklets on a random Friday or Saturday night, in the past, you've had a couple of, acoustic artists playing. I just love to see that come back to our area in the summer. We have such great summers here in Vermont, and to really utilize that outside space and have people spending time there is always fun. So.
Well, it's been a pleasure to have you check in with us as we do. We try to get every month or 5-6 weeks. And I think we've handled a lot of it, the TIF, the charter changes, and some of the downtown events will be coming up this summer. So, Mike Doenges, thank you very much. We will look forward to having you back in the next few weeks.
Thanks, Brian.
And we will see all of you, or you will hear all of this, hopefully next week on Catamount Community Connection. And thank you for joining us.